Soul Festival. And I'd like to welcome you on behalf of First Presbyterian Church, the beloved community, and you are all part of it. How many people are here from First Pres? I'd also like to thank the board members of the Santa Fe Soul Festival who've been working hard all year. Raise your hand. Maura, Marilyn, Gregory. Hey, everybody's working on your husband, photographing and helping in every way possible. I'd also like to thank Jean from Garcia Books. And Delta Sigma Theta is in the house. Now, there are not that many very young people here, but one of the things that we can pass on to everyone is that having friends makes a difference. If someone said, "Oh, Madeleine, this is all you," not true. And having people that will support you because it does take a village. And quiet as it's kept, it takes a lot of villages to make things happen. And I'm so happy that we were able to have this event. Our gospel concert, which will be tomorrow at the St. Francis Auditorium, pays for the free events that we have around the city throughout the year. And I'm going to, we're limiting this to a certain time because I have stories about all these people. But I can truthfully say that they are my friends, and that we're getting closer and closer, and they're sharing better ideas. And we want to thank Ahmed for the refreshments and coming, and Julia for volunteering. And it's going to be wonderful.
Thank you, Madeleine. It's a pleasure to be here with two people from the food world that I admire so much, so thank you. Adrian Miller, to my right, is a writer, attorney, and certified barbecue judge. He has served as a special assistant to President Bill Clinton, a senior policy analyst for Colorado Governor Bill Richard Jr., and a Southern Foodways Alliance board member. He's the author of The President's Kitchen, Cabinet, the story of African Americans who have fed our first families, from the Washingtons to the Obamas, Black Smoke, African Americans in the United States of Barbecue, and James Beard Award winner Soul Food, the surprising story of American cuisine, one plate at a time. Ahmed Obo, to my right, far right, is founder and chef owner of Jamba Cafe and Jamba Cafe in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Originally from Lamoon Island off the coast of Kenya, Ahmed came to America in 1995. Worked in restaurant kitchens in Santa Fe, New York, then opened Jamba Cafe in August 2009. Jamba Cafe was featured in the Sandy's and Stews episode of the Food Network's Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. Chef began serving his Afro-Caribbean fare on the road with Jumbo Hapa, the Jamba Cafe food truck, in 2016. Chef Ahmed published his first cookbook, the Jamba Cafe Cookbook, Recipes and Remembrances of My Journey from Africa to America, in 2016. Welcome. When we're thinking about soul food, which is the subject today, I think one of the earliest soulful moments is how we are fed as children. And so I wanted to start off and find out a little bit about who was doing the cooking, who was feeding you, and what you were eating.
Hi everybody. So you already know my name, you know a lot about me. So moving forward, your question, who's doing the cooking, who's feeding who. So growing up as a young boy, at that time I was young because there was few of us. I mean, a little farm there that was, vegetable, beans, corn. No rice, of course. Corn and beans was the thing that we can grow every year. So I watched my grandmother too. She was my grandmother. Unfortunately, she was the cook of my mom. She was a great, amazing, cook. So, I wouldn't call her chef because we don't use that term, but she was the one cooking and feeding us. Again, watch her, step by step from grinding the corn, and then my grandmother, she would help her by cleaning up the corn, and then we would make a ugali, which is a corn meal with just water and salt. And then at the same time, from the island, the fish was right there. So my dad, of course, was involved in the ocean, and he always bring fresh fish. I would take fishing line, we go over the shore, we dig some holes and get some worm, and we get some fresh fish right off the shore. So our other days, during the rainy season, we would find a mosquito net. If you didn't go to school, we just drag along the shore and we have shrimp. So it was a great experience, growing up. So my mom was the one, feeding us.
And you included her in your acknowledgments. You said, "My mother for the love she bestowed on all of us and for the wonderful legacy of delicious food, which continues to inspire me every day." And then later in the book, you said, "It wasn't until I was in my teens that I realized how hard life was for my parents."
Yes, that was for sure. Yeah, I experienced. I was right there, and the part that I realized that I would go to school, and then they would ask us to, paying a school fee. And if you didn't have a school fee, so you have to go home. So it was hard life, I had life as the best as it can be, coming home, you are eating a chai, which is the chai. All of you, most of you know, the chai latte. So at home, it is the milk will be serving for the babies, and we'll just drink black tea and 2 slices of bread, where the bread will be like almost an example like a sopapilla. So and then from there, off you go to school, and then you come home. This is where I learned that my mom, she needs some help. The lunch will not be ready, so I was just hanging out with her, and I grated a coconut. Maybe she would send me to the store and buy the spices. That's where I was able to learn about the spices. But at that time, honestly, I was no idea what I was doing, just helping. So yeah, I was preparing myself to be a chef. Because in our culture, we do not allowed to cook, but somehow I was right there, helping the family. So as hard the life was, I had to stop school and join my dad to go, do whatever he was doing, making the limestone, cutting some mangrove trees to build houses for people, and cutting some firewoods to bring to town and sell, and take the money and bring home. But I was fortunate, I was built to, to work, and my parents were, very work ethic, so my dad was, okay, let's go. You don't want to go to school, you're not going to sleep. Nope, get up, 5, 6 o'clock, let's go. You don't want to go to school? And then I did go to school. One time, like, no, you have to go to school. My mom actually, she was the one, she's like, come on, you go to school, you gotta go to school. So I said, like, okay, I don't want it, because I'm not feeling like the school. I want to help. So as I'm experiencing all this journey, my dad took me to school, and then I tell the teacher that you don't want to go to school. You don't want to come to school. So, and the teacher, they don't accept that. So I just, wait, and then again, it took me to the classroom seriously. The bell rang, I took off, and then I went back to school. And then my dad, he tried his time to whip me too. I was like, no, you gotta go back to school. I was like, So anyway, so they understand that I'm not for it, And at the same time, I'm watching it. My vision is like, I want to help my family. That was my vision, you know. So growing up, watching not only my family that are struggling, I see other families too, they're struggling, you know, and hard life, you know, carrying, you know, whatever arrival from the mainland, the food, the mangoes, and all kind of things. Like, this is a tough life. So then I see other people who have been to school, they sit in the offices and doing easy work. So I did, you know, I sacrificed myself to go to work so my siblings can go to school. And again, and I seriously, back in my mind, it's like, it's okay, you know, I know God will, you know, reward me one day. I'm just gonna go for it. So I'm here to do this job for my family. And then I'm gonna, it's a long story, and I'm gonna leave it shorter. And then my dad came to me when I was, you know, a teenager at that time. I'm taking the tourists out, fishing, kind of a deal. And then he saw me that, you know, I'm hanging out with Wazungu, you know, like a tourist kind of deal. I said, oh man, this guy is gonna get lost. You know, that means he's gonna get drinking and small kind of a deal. It's like, okay, I better find you a wife. And I was like, okay, that's fine, let's sit down and talk a little bit about this. I said, well, you don't see what I'm doing, you know? I'm helping you. If I can do this for myself, then I have no problem helping, you know, my family. So I'm helping your family. So please understand, I'm not ready to get married, and allow me. So he's like, okay, so when you're ready, come back to me. So anyway, I'm gonna get this story to this part. Answer that question.
I think we'll hear more about that. That sounds interesting. And then Adrian, you dedicated soul food to your parents, and you said, thanks for all those years of soul in the suburbs. So tell me what it was like growing up. Who was doing the cooking, and what were you eating?
Yeah, so first, so good to see you all visiting from Denver for this panel. I'm going to admit something that's going to immediately lose me all street cred on the subject of soul food. I was born and raised in Denver, Colorado. All right, let me win you back. So my parents are from the South. My mom, Johnetta Miller, she's from Chattanooga, Tennessee. I know you've got a connection there. And my dad's from Helena, Arkansas. They separately came to Denver in the 1960s and met in the church that I go to this day, Campbell Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church. So when I was young, we moved to the suburbs of Denver. We moved to Aurora, suburb southeast of Denver, if you're familiar with Denver. And so I'm grateful to my parents for a lot of things, but I'm really glad that they, even in the lily white suburbs of Denver, they kept us tethered and immersed in Black life. So we kept going to that Black church, and then my parents raised us with Black food traditions. So my mom, Johnetta Miller, she was the cook in our house, and she's a very good cook. She was the kind of cook, I don't know, you know, she's the kind of cook that when you go to a Black church and there's a food function, people ask who made whatever before they actually take it. If they heard my mom's name, they were trying to get seconds. That's kind of cook she is. So she's the one that taught me how to cook, and eventually I wanted to help her out and give her a break on weekends. And so my very first thing that I ever made was actually Indian fried bread, as we call it today. That was the very first thing that I ever made, so to give her a break. So yeah. And my dad's a good cook as well, but my mom was the one. Even when it came to barbecue, she was the one that was throwing down.
It's a good segue because I want to talk, not to throw out a difficult question, but what is soul food? I mean, you talk about this, obviously it's a subject of the book, but the difference between soul food and Southern food. So kind of talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the difference between soul food and Southern food is that soul food tastes better. So there's a lot of overlap because both food traditions draw from West Africa, Western Europe, and what the indigenous people were doing here. This all comes together in the American South. So it's really just a difference in performance. So for instance, soul food tends to be more heavily seasoned. The lines between savory and sweet tend to be more blurred. So for instance, sugar and cornbread. Like there are a lot of white Southerners that would say, as soon as you add sugar to cornbread, it becomes cake.
Right.
But almost every soul food recipe that I've ever seen for cornbread has some amount of sugar in it. And then, this is less so the case now, but soul food used to be marked by the use of variety meats and coarser ingredients because people, you know, tended to be poorer than the general population. So they had to use these lesser cuts of meat to be create something delicious. Now, these lesser cuts of meat have been discovered, and so now people are paying $30 a plate for these lesser cuts of meat, which used to be $5 in the soul food joint. But it's really just kind of performance. And there's certain things, especially in restaurant culture, that you'll see in a soul food place that I just never seen in a southern restaurant. Like I've never seen chitlins in a southern restaurant. And conversely, I've never seen ambrosia in a soul food restaurant. So those are the differences that kind of play out.
Yeah. I mean, I'm interested, you came over to the US in the 90s. Did you know what soul food, American soul food was? It was on your register? Did you go to restaurants, whatever?
Oh, tell them what the island is, because you said island, but you didn't tell them that. No, it's on.
Okay. The island. I mean, the reason I didn't say was like being by yeah, I'm from the island, the coast of Kenya. That's where I come from. So if you know about this, no, I did not know because I came straight from the island. You know, of course, I had visit Europe for a little bit, and then from the island, of course, just came here. And okay, so now remember, I didn't know if I'm coming here. I came here to cook, so I was just like, there is an opportunity to come to America. I just planned to come here for 6 months, so I didn't know what soul food is.
And I'm interested about how people have defined it, and you talk about the Black Power movement and about what happened with the name soul food, and talk a little bit about that, and then did that work to the favor, or were there issues that kind of came out about it? Because you talk about that quite a bit in the book.
So the most common explanation given for the label soul food is that in the 1960s, there was these very strong expressions of black identity, black power, black is beautiful, that kind of thing. But actually, the earliest joining of the words soul and food in the English language go back to Shakespeare. So in one of his earliest plays, The Two Gentlemen of Verona, there's a scene where two women, Julia and Lucetta, are talking about this really sexy guy named Proteus. And so Proteus walks by and Julia says to Lucetta, "Oh, knowest thou not that his looks are my soul's food? Pity the dearth that I pined in by longing for that food so long a time." All right? So there's a couple of takeaways. One is, even in the late 16th century, it was not unusual for two girlfriends to get together and describe a guy as yummy. That's the first thing. But Shakespeare's doing his wordplay, right? And so in the English language for the next 400 years, soul food meant doing anything to edify your spiritual life. Going to church, listening to a sermon, studying scripture, singing hymns. Fast forward to the late 40s, you've got a cadre of African-American jazz musicians that are pretty miffed because they feel like the white musicians are the ones who are making the most money and getting the most fame for this musical genre they felt that they had created. So they decided to consciously take jazz to a place where they thought white musicians could not mimic the sound. And that was the sound of the black church in the rural South. So if you're a jazz fan, you've noticed that there was this gospel-infused jazz sound that emerges in the late 40s and early 50s. The musicians, the black musicians, describe that sound as soul and funky. So soul is the one that caught on in the culture. So soul music first, then soul brothers, soul sisters, soul food. So we could easily be calling this funky food, right? But that's not the one that caught on. It's soul food. And so the interesting thing that does happen in the 1960s, though, is that black power activists were trying to figure out, well, how do we bring together black people who are experiencing oppression differently in different parts of the country? And so they turned to culture, because culture is a great connector. And so they often use food. So soul food really gained momentum, even though it had been floating around in the culture for a decade or so. It really got momentum in the 1960s. And the other consequence of this, let me just say, there was even a manifesto from the Black Power advocates leaked to the New York Times that said white people can't understand things like cornbread, beans, and all these other southern foods. Now this was news to white Southerners because they've been eating the same foods for 200 years, right? But in the 60s, soul becomes black and Southern becomes white. And we're actually still living with that split to this day. So one of the interesting conversations happening in food circles is this idea of culinary justice. Like, how do we talk about Southern food in a way that reintegrates black contribution to this food that's immensely popular right now? Even though soul food is popular, but it's still more stigmatized than Southern food.
Absolutely. You have a great line. Food was one avenue to create identity, instill pride, and underscore a triumphal narrative. And that's pretty powerful to think of food being able to do that.
Yeah, because a lot of the story about soul food is about resourcefulness, ingenuity, taking the stuff that people didn't want and making it something delicious. The story is much more complex than that, because this idea that soul food is just what white people didn't want, the master's throwaway, that is not actually true. One of the biggest surprises in my research is if you go back and look at what Southerners were eating, it's pretty much more about class and place than it is about race. White people and black people in the same area of the same socioeconomic class are eating the same food. Now, because of racism, they're not eating it together, but they're eating the same food. And that was an eye-opener to me, because this narrative of soul food is that it was wholly created with despised food for black people. And there are examples of enslaved narratives. There are enslaved people talking about the master asking for chitlins to be prepared for dinner. And if they weren't made well enough, they were punished. And you may not know this, but it just happened, or maybe happening this weekend. In Sally, South Carolina, there is a chitlin festival. Started by white people in the 1970s, and it's still going today. Thousands of people show up to this festival, and I have on good information that you can smell the festival at the 50-mile marker as you're driving towards it.
I'm interested in this idea of identity that we were talking with soul food, because your restaurant really is about identity. It's about you bringing together these flavors and spices from your homeland and sharing it with people who may never have had anything like that.
Yes. So that's, it's been a very interesting experience. So growing up, again, eating my mom's food. Again, I said there was no identity with food, soul food, etc. But as I've been here with Jamba, my experience, been a great, amazing experience to see what I have created have brought so many people together, and from the events I do, the events I do around town, the review afterward, after they eat, so that kind of like has built me momentum. It's like, it is a soul food, no matter where it is come from, because for me, we are feeding our soul, so there is no separation, in the food. So now, the interesting part is some of the other kids were telling me, like, what is this food, kind of deal. It's like, this is the same food that you growing up eating with, because it's a chicken, yes, it's a beef, yes, and lamb, goat. I mean, of course, not goats, a lot of people didn't grow up eating goat. And the goat was a challenge for me to decide to put on the menu, because people was like, are you gonna sell goat here? And nobody's gonna buy goat. Nobody's gonna eat goat. I can tell you, I outsold the local goats because I cannot keep up with it. Everybody, and then I've been these days, fortunately, as time move on, I used to get a lot of older people and who have traveled the world, and they wanted to try, African food that they have experienced. They come to Jamba's like, this reminds me of Africa, and also the same people, the way I combine the spices, it reminded them of growing up, so I didn't understand that, but somehow they understand what is in the food. So, and as I keep it the way it is, it's simple. I know the menu's been like the same way over the years, because I get feedback. I'm coming back for the chicken curry, because that takes care of my whatever I'm going through. That's I keep on the menu, and then the lamb soup, the goat soup. So after I mastered the spices at the same time. I had one of the chefs like, well, people like your food. He say it's a little sweet, but they like your food. It's like, that's true. Honestly, I'm not putting any sugar in it. It's all natural. There is I add fruit in it, and then I add what do you call these sweet potatoes, carrots. Those all natural ingredients, coconut milk. And then one thing is that I learned about that, the is you will be familiar with. And I was talking to my son, it's like, the sweet, why people like sweet, because we growing up eating sweet. So there it is again, that it's not sugar again, but just the sweet that it reminds you as a child, So again, I had to say, I don't want to add, artificial or anything to make sweet, just naturally the way it is. And it's been also a great journey for me to learn that to keep as food, and I think I've been feeling a lot of soul. So I'm calling my food, it is a soul food.
Adrian, you were talking just a while ago about this idea of economy, of soul food, with having some roots from that. And Ahmed, you talked about that with the way your mother kind of magically created these meals from very small ingredients. But that there's also another side to it of the richness of the culinary traditions of West Africa. And you talk about that and the influx of Europeans who came in the 1400s, I believe, and how much more complex and varied it was. So that when they were coming over to the United States, that came with them.
So it's interesting. So a lot of African ingredients were actually introduced into the American South before Africans arrived in large numbers, because Europeans had experienced them. They've been in West Africa a couple of centuries before the slave trade even started. And then several foods from South America go to Africa and then come over to the American South, and people think they're African in origin, for like peanuts, for example, or sweet potatoes. So it's really interesting story. But yeah, I did not know the extent to which African ingredients had been introduced into what we call Southern food and soul food, because you just don't hear about that stuff. It's just, this is the cuisine, and you're like, oh, okay. But I didn't know okra was from Africa. I didn't know watermelon was from Africa. Black-eyed peas are from Africa. There's a type of sesame seed, they call it bene, that's from Africa. And so once I started writing soul food and doing more research in this book, I was like, wow, there's a lot of influence here. And we have not passed on that knowledge, so I think the challenge for us now who love these foods is in reintroducing them, showing the connections. Because at this time, I think the American diner is more interested in the backstory of food than ever before, and really willing to explore global flavors. So I think the palates are ripe for education and, just getting down and grubbing.
And Ahmed, this plays into where you're from as well, because you talk about the spice trade, which was part of both Eastern Africa and also in the Caribbean. And I'm interested in that because that you're talking about going back to the 11th or 12th centuries, so very, very rich heritage that you draw upon.
Yes, the Lamu was the harbor, the trading place. Of course, I wasn't there at that time. But growing up, I saw those big boats. They call them, I forgot the name of them. They are bomb. So they were, from India. So they will come there and anchor, in the shore for a long, long time. So they were waiting for merchandise to come from the mainland, etc. And then they bring some other things from India and other areas. So, and then also at the same time we experienced, as there is villages there we had some Portuguese too, they came in the area, and Indian and Portugal, and of course British over there. So the Arabs, they said it was big. We have a big influence from Yemen and Oman. So growing up, there's this culture of mixed culture, and then of course we're right on Africa, so all those flavors they were getting trade back and forth, and I was very happy. Now I'm happy I grew up in that island to experience, to inherit the whole experience, and also to be able to continue, and I'm hoping some days I will be able to go back and sharing what I have learned here, because we take a lot of it for granted, it happened here too. Now those McDonald's, Canada deal, that happens over there too, and the kids are like, oh yeah, this is the best food. But it is, also I was talking to my mom the other day, the food was so good and healthy in their time. They didn't have this experience of diabetes or blood pressure kind of a deal. Now it is overtaken, because the company comes and they don't care about the human. I mean, I'm sure this is why you guys now are going back to organic. And there was organic, completely nothing. Now, they cannot even grow a corn without spraying it. I mean, when I got there was none of that. So again, we walk to the market, you can smell the spices and these big sacks. I mean, you want to experience that. Zanzibar is still happening. That you get off the shore, the cloves, that's the smell of the island. And then you go to the market, you have this cardamom, and then fresh ginger, and especially when you go to the, spice tour, you have all kinds of spice that you're like, wow, this is where the black pepper come from, You see where the cinnamon, so we have all the rich, sources of the spices. So anyway, I'm grateful that I grew up in that place, and then also I am here to be able to execute, to share, because even there, honestly, I would be just a fisherman. I go catch fish and bring home, and that's it. So I am so happy to be, especially of course, Santa Fe is small and execute at small level, and also the people have come up and tell me, by seeing it, that we appreciate what you do. So that's what I can share. So,
Adrian, I was going to ask you, because it feels appropriate since we're in a church, to talk about the importance of church suppers and that sense of coming together in a communal way to share food. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the Black church is one of the most important institutions in the African American community. It's one of the earliest ones that Black people actually controlled. But during slavery, especially on the large plantations, after church was one of the few times that enslaved Africans and later enslaved African Americans could come together with relatively little supervision and control. And then the after church meal was a very important time for building community. And this, even after emancipation, the Black church is really important because in the rural South, there's a lot of isolation. People just don't realize that you have to go miles before you see somebody usually. And so the church was a social center, a spiritual center, and a place for actual nourishment. And then even after the Great Migration, when people moved to the cities, the church still plays that role. Because when a lot of migrants leave the South and show up in communities outside the South, they were often very food insecure. And so the church was a very important dining option. A lot of churches, even my church in Denver, used to run a restaurant to provide cheap meals. And we have some people that developed cult followings just because they fed people. There was a guy called Father Divine who was from Georgia, right? Shows up in Long Island and starts telling people he's this, God incarnate. And people start believing him. And I think it's because he used to serve these 30-course meals for just a quarter.
What was it called, Heaven?
Yeah, he did. So the restaurants were called Heavens. The chicken was called Glorified, which I think is good. So there's this pivotal thing. But I think the main thing is the spiritual needs of Africans and spiritual practice of African heritage people, a chance to come together for community, and then this constant backdrop of food insecurity. That was by design. It was an element of control. So all of these things are coming together, and you see that through line through Black history.
You have a great, you quote a New York Times article from the 80s, the Reverend Calvin Butts, executive minister of Abyssinian Baptist Church. It has to do with communion. Communion was a meal, a feast of love. It is a kind of extension of our Africanness.
Yeah, absolutely. And I personally believe that cooking is an act of love. Because when you make a plate of food for somebody and you serve it to them, you're saying you care for their survival. Even if the food is straight nasty, the act is meaningful. It's still meaningful.
Before we open it up to questions, we won't allow enough time for that. Excuse me. I want to talk about who your food heroes are, people that you admire. And let me start with you. And I know your mom may be at the top of the list.
Yes, she's the top of the list, for sure, 100%. because the reason that I am being able to serve you this good food is because of her. And my practice was, if I'm going to serve my mom, the food has to be really good. You know, seriously. So she's the top of the list.
Who else is on there?
Top of the, that's a tough question because there are so many, you know. So, again, my daughter, she had guided me some very important guiding to, a lot of time, she's not, closer to me as I was. She lived by when I met with her. She has great ideas, how to help me just get some important decision. And then the other people, I'm gonna say in general, Santa Fe has been amazing. That's where I am here. I made it 15 years, and it's still growing big. So come on, I cannot tell you, everybody, because everybody, meeting everybody when they leave the restaurant, they tell me how happy they are, on the social media. So honestly, I'm not gonna, say name. Of course, my mom, her name is Halima Ziora. She was amazing, amazing cook, and she guided me through this life. And then also, what she guided me, and one thing is, when I tell her I'm coming to America, she's like, go do it. And when I'm happy about it, that I did not disappoint her. I did not disappoint her. She's happy that she say go, because I have done so much for community over there, and I've done so much in the community in Santa Fe, and that makes me happy. As you say, you cook, you have to have love. So I've been enjoying it, cooking with love. I can be there sweating, and when I come out there, then everybody's happy and smiling,
That's a
So
good thing.
it is a good thing. I do my best, as I said, to keep up after 15 years. And I'm praying to do it not too long. Because I've doubled up, those hours, as you see me, I'm working long hours. So I'm praying to be strong and healthy to continue, and finding a best person to continue, so that the generation to come to experience Jamba.
Adrian, tell me about your food heroes.
I would say it's the late afternoon fry cook at Popeyes. She always gives me an extra biscuit. All right.
It's not too long.
My late mother, Adrian Miller, just because she was such a wonderful cook, and she was excited when I started this food journey. She was still alive when I started writing these books, and I learned a lot from her. I would say the other person is someone named Edna Lewis.
And you mentioned her
Yeah.
quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm glad people know about her, yeah. She's no longer with us. She died in 2005 or 6, I can't remember. But she grew up in a place called Freetown, Virginia, community founded by formerly enslaved people. And her cookbook, A Taste of Country Cooking, is a literary cookbook. And I encourage you to get it. And if you read through that, the way she organizes, she wrote this book in 1976, so this is before a lot of cookbooks were designed this way. She talks about her community, and then she goes through the seasons, and she tells you what's happening in the community, why they have certain foods there, what it meant in context for that community. It's just a beautiful cookbook, and more people need to know about her, because she was a very interesting person, influenced a lot of people. And then other than that, I would say, I go back and forth, but there are 3 people that I discovered in my book about presidential cooks. So there was one guy named Hercules, who was the enslaved cook for President Washington. Another guy named James Hemings, who was the enslaved cook for Thomas Jefferson before he became president. If you've heard of Sally Hemings, James Hemings was one of her older brothers, the second oldest brother. And then there was a woman named Zephyr Wright, who was the cook for Lyndon Johnson. And she actually changed the course of history, because Johnson would talk to her about her Jim Crow experiences in the South. And he used those experiences to mobilize support for the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And when that law was passed, and presidents, when they signed bills, they used several pins. He gave one of those pins to her and said, "You deserve this as much as anyone." So a lot of these presidential cooks gave our presidents a window on Black life. Now, it was up to the president to decide whether to open that window and peek in or not, but when they did, I think our nation, sorry about that, brother, I think our nation has been better for it.
I have to say the story, and I think it's FDR and Bixby and
Oh, yeah.
Churchill.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you have to, because I
Yeah.
had to read that aloud to my husband.
All right, so FDR, because of his polio condition, he would go spend long periods of time in Warm Springs, Georgia. And he was so happy because the food was good. So I don't know if you've heard stories, but the food in the Roosevelt White House was just nasty. This is how bad the food was. When people were invited to state dinners at the White House, they would actually eat beforehand. That's how bad it was. So he had this cook who would, Daisy Bonner was her name, who was a cook for a wealthy white family in Warm Springs, Georgia. And so this wealthy white family, in order to ingratiate themselves with the Roosevelt, they would just loan Daisy Bonner to the Roosevelts for as long as he was gonna be in Warm Springs, sometimes weeks at a time. And so she made a whole bunch of Southern foods and got him hooked on pig's feet. So Roosevelt loved pig's feet. And so he actually serves them to Winston Churchill in the White House. And let's just say Winston Churchill was not feeling them at all.
Didn't he suggest that they should fry for the next
Yeah,
time?
yeah. So the way they served it, it was a sweet and sour pig's feet recipe, which he got from the Princess of Norway, Princess Margaret of Norway. But Churchill was eating them, and FDR asked him, well, how do you like them? And he says, I think they're kind of chewy, kind of disagreeable. And then he says, well, next time we should have them fried. And then Churchill just looked at him and said, I don't think I'd like them fried. And they both just cracked up. So, yeah, but he was definitely hooked on pig's feet.
I think that's a beautiful point to stop and to take some questions from the audience. It's always the first person. It has to be, there we go.
All right, soul food. What about comfort food? What did that term enter into our discussion?
Oh, that's interesting. Do you have some immediate thoughts on that? Okay, all right. So yeah, so people often ask me, well, what's the difference between soul food and comfort food? And I just think they're just, there's a great amount of overlap. I think a lot of the foods that we would list as comfort foods would be in the soul food category as well. So I just think it's just the fact that soul food is so closely associated with Black people that it takes on a certain vibe. But yeah, comfort food is very universal. But I think that they accomplish the same goal, right? There's this tapped into nostalgia. You think about a caregiver or a loved one who fed you. It's about community and good feelings. Yeah, so I think they're almost interchangeable, but in the Black context, that's where you use soul food. Now, I will say this though. As I'm buying more and more cookbooks, especially from other countries, you're starting to see more people talk about their peasant cooking or their poverty cooking or whatever. They're calling that soul. So I have a cookbook called Japanese Soul Cooking, right? So they see the genius of that term coined here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, the same answer.
I wonder when they agree. In the back.
Okay, I got a question. What are chitlins?
Oh,
What are chitlins?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. So chitlins is the short term for a word called chitterlings, which is a British generic term for entrails, so animal guts. So it could be any animal, but it's mostly associated with pigs here in this country. But chitlins was a high-end dish in European cookbooks from the 1600s, and it started out as from the hunt, so venison entrails were what they were focusing on. But the cookbooks, 1600 cookbooks from Britain, high-end cookbooks have chitterling recipes. And if you look around the world, a lot of people eat guts. We have an attitude about it. I know, just like we have an attitude about it here. Yeah, are you okay? Okay. We have an attitude about it here, but a lot of cultures eat intestines. Menudo, yeah. If you go to France, you get andouillette. That's a sausage made out of chitlins. So a lot of cultures eat that, but that's what it is. Yes.
Another question. Yes, Booker.
So, not just soul food, but ethnic dishes. How dependent are recreating ethnic flavors dependent upon utensils? For instance, the Chinese and Japanese use woks, and some people use tandouris, and there are all these different kinds of pieces of equipment. How necessary is that to create what we're trying to do? And are we getting an authentic flavor when we use a skillet out of the drawer?
All right, it is good. It's a good question. Wow. How do you get authentic flavor if you cook out of a grill or out of the what do you call the wood stove or something kind of a deal? Yeah, that's what. So well, there is a difference, honestly, because if you use like all the naturally, tools to cook, like a clay, straight, what do you call it, open fire, stuff that is totally like authentic and the flavor, the control of the dish that you're making, and you can see the difference, because you do have to pay a lot of attention how to control your dish that you cook. And of course here you have a burner, you can control of it, but my experience, at the end is who is cooking, So at the end is who is cooking and how to make the dish authentic. So that's been my answer, is who is cooking the dish. Because again, growing up, my mom, my family is that, we collect the wood and we cook on open fire flame kind of a deal. And we had a few pots and carvers, and then at that time, we had a few people who use clay, and a few people who use some machines. And then again, the last time, going back home, the Chinese have introduced these machines to cook the same food, and honestly, it does not taste the same. So my mom will get the cornmeal and the fire, she'll make the fire and make the bread out of the pot kind of a deal. And now they mix the ingredients, and then you put on the instant pan, and in a few minutes it's ready there. So there they will put the fire on the bottom, and take the wood and no fire, put the fire on the top, and cook a different level of the food. You see the crust from the bottom to the top. So over here, I cannot say much. Again, back to the say it depends who is cooking.
Fair enough. Other questions?
We gotta go.
Oh, I was just
we
gonna
gotta
ask.
go to black
Oh,
smoke,
yeah,
since
yeah.
you mentioned smoke.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I was just gonna say, I think it's also a matter of, can you just hit that flavor profile? If you can do that, I don't know if the cooking utensils are that important. It seems to be there is a correlation though between having those things, but I think technology is kind of rendering some of these things obsolete because it's allowing you to do things and reach flavor profiles without having certain utensils. So it's gonna be interesting to see the answer to that question maybe in 5 years or so. But I just think anybody can cook a culture's food as long as they hit the flavor profiles. What really makes me upset is you've got people outside of a culture making food and misrepresenting what it is and how it actually tastes. And who wants a nasty version of some culture's food, right? We want the real thing. And so my plea is that more chefs would just pay attention to what they're cooking, acknowledge where they got it from, and hit the flavor profiles correctly. And as much as menus now tell us everything we want to know about plants and animals that we're about to eat, you know where they were farmed, the personal habits of the animal, all that kind of stuff. My thing is, why can't we culturally source? If you're gonna have Nashville hot chicken on your menu, you should say, this is from a black-owned restaurant in Nashville called Prince's. But we don't have that. And a lot of times when the servers have a chance to explain food, they often get it wrong or don't say anything. So that's a missed opportunity. Because again, people really want to know the backstory of what they're eating and where it's coming from and the cultural significance of that thing.
In soul food, you talk about at the end about the future of soul food and encouraging people to experiment and riff, but when they get to a certain point, to acknowledge that it's something different.
Yeah, because I think a lot of this stuff just falls off the wheels. But there are some things that are surprises. For instance, vegan soul food, which people think is an oxymoron, is actually one of the hottest trends right now in soul food. And if you go back and look at what enslaved Africans and African Americans were actually eating and what they were eating in West Africa, it's very close to what we call vegan today. Because they weren't having meat as an entree. It was just there to season the vegetables. And a lot of the things that we think of with soul food, they were prestigious ingredients back in the day. So enslaved people did not have regular access to white flour and white sugar and prestigious cuts of meat because their status in society said you're not worthy to have these things on a regular basis. So the real revolution that happened after slavery ends and Great Migration is once people got to cities and began to prosper, they started eating the celebrations of the foods of the South on a more regular basis. Like fried chicken was something you only had every once in a while and only during summer. Now you can have fried chicken multiple times a day, which is why I love my fried cook at Popeyes. But, yeah, right. So I don't care what culture you're talking about. If you eat the culture's celebration food on a regular basis, it's not going to be good for your health, right? And so I tell people, think about soul food in a more comprehensive and holistic way, and listen to what dietitians are telling us to eat. More dark leafy greens, more sweet potatoes, more fish, hibiscus, okra is a superfood now. These are all part of the soul food tradition. So it's about moderation and the context in which you're eating these foods. But in addition to vegan soul food, down home healthy, cutting back on the fat, the salt, and the sugar, and then you're seeing a lot of fusion too, like people mixing Black and Latino traditions, Black and Asian. Like for instance, there's something called soul food egg rolls. So imagine a wonton filled with collard greens, wrapped up, sealed, and fried. Yeah, that's a thing. Yeah. And then, don't get mad at me. There's a guy in Atlanta, Georgia. He calls himself the Blaxican. Okay, that's what he calls himself. Don't get mad at me. Yeah, but he's doing. I did not come up with that. But he's doing things like collard green quesadilla. And so you're seeing a lot of playfulness right now. And again, it's that openness to global flavors.
Other questions? Oh, yes, sorry.
Well, I'm just wondering, I guess Vivian Howard wrote a book about her kind of tagline is discovering the South one ingredient at a time. And she had a whole series on seasoning meat, which I think my Aunt Rosa was big on seasoning meat. So it's, is that something that either of you could speak about? Or if you do use seasoning meat, what type do you use and why?
Yeah, so did you watch Vivian Howard's show?
I did, every single one 3 times.
Okay. Do I look familiar?
Were you on?
Yes. I was on the barbecue one, but that's all right.
Don't
That's
let
one
him
of
watch that.
the best ones.
I know, right? So yeah, I use seasoning meat. So for those who don't know, when I was talking about little cuts of meat, putting the vegetables, so I'll just explain the way I make my greens real quick. So I make mustard and turnip greens, and what I do is I get my water, I put in either salt pork or smoked turkey if I want a healthier vibe, with some onion and some garlic and some red pepper flakes, and boil that all together. So that creates a flavored stock, and then I put my greens in there and then let them simmer for a while. So I do seasoning meat only when I make my vegetables. So only when I make my greens and my black eyed peas. That's the only time I use it. But I'm using smoked turkey more and more these days because I want a healthier profile. And believe it or not, I'm getting more flavor out of the smoked turkey than I'm getting now. I said this in the South one time, and somebody said, "What's wrong with the pigs in Colorado?" And I think they have a point.
What was the question? How are you seasoning your
Seasoning meat.
seasoning meat? Okay, so again, I have a basic seasoning that you already know. Definitely, that makes a big difference. I do have a big shelf of excuse me, all the spices, and that makes me going crazy, not knowing what I'm gonna come out with, And then so now I have this new kids there. I'm training them. So and they're like, "What are you doing? Make sure you write it down." It's like, okay, you try, I'll try, but I know this is, but again, after I cook, these days I discovered a new thing, that the brisket, as you said, that was the cut. People are like, no, it's not, the cheap meat, but if you can season it in the brisket, and they cook it right, it's amazing, you know. So again, for me again, there's one thing that you should always try to find some kind of a chili, like to season it or whatever. If it's habanero, cayenne, something like that. That will bring you whatever meat that you're going to use is going to help you to get to where you want it to be. Then don't forget your salt. Don't forget. I know that's the one thing that maybe you don't want to do if you don't seasoning your food with salt. Anything else, I don't know, but you guys. But to me, that it's not gonna come out. You use all the ingredients you're gonna do. But salt is the one key of ingredient that you should always have and use.
And I forgot to say that I also use ham hocks, like a smoked ham hock, as my seasoning meat. So I forgot that.
Now I have 3 sets of instructions. One, Garcia books. They don't want to take any of those books back to the store. And this is your opportunity to have your book signed. The other thing I have to say is that Julia is the founder of the Santa Fe Literary Festival.
Oh, wow.
She said that, and one of the things that happened with the Literary Festival, the first year there was food, and now there is not food, so we have an opportunity for the Santa Fe Literary Food Festival coming up. So let's thank everybody.
Just as a little incentive, I am so grateful that you have my book, that if I will autograph it any way you want. So if you want me to write down, I couldn't have written a book without you, I will do that.
Have refreshments, buy t-shirts, tote bags, support this organization. Yeah, donate cash, take your free pen. Thanks so much for coming.